Bonehead Resistance by Narelle King, Chapter 1. I don't think you should take Ollie to the protest. Adam's words were lost in the revving of car engines outside. Amber pushed the window down. It caught, as always. You'd think, she gritted her teeth, that $1 million would buy you an apartment with windows that frickin' close. She tossed the phone onto her bed and pushed with both hands. The window slammed shut. She grabbed the phone. Sorry, what? I don't think you should take Ollie to the protest. Amber squinted at the cracked screen, though she didn't need to see Adam to picture the pained look he'd be wearing. I haven't got anyone to leave him with. Can't you leave it a week? I'll be back Friday. She parroted what Beck had said to her, hoping Adam wouldn't realise. If ordinary people don't fight, Walker will get away with cancelling the election. It'll be the end of democracy in Australia. She leaned the phone against the pillow and laid the baby carrier on the bed, placing Oliver on top. Oliver blew spit bubbles, adding new stains to the white quilt cover. Adam tried again. What if the protest's violent? Beck assured me it'll be peaceful. She should know. She's one of the organisers. Of course she is, Adam muttered. Is there a protest she wouldn't attend? Rights for cane toads, maybe? Amber pulled a face at him, confident that he wouldn't see through the broken screen. She stands up for what she believes in. I wish I did that more often. She wrapped the baby carrier straps around her waist and struggled to clip them together. Far be it for me to argue with Beck, but it might be out of her control. Walker seems to be willing to do whatever it takes to stay in power. There are some weird rumours coming out of Canberra. Weird is right. Did you hear the one about the monsters? The clasps snapped together. She pulled the carrier over her arms and settled Oliver so that they were both comfortable. Adam snorted. Walker has a secret army of monsters, no doubt believed by the same people who think vaccines are used for mind control. Coronavirus was spread by 5G mobile phone signals, and there's a secret cable of Satan worshipping for pedophiles. Amber grinned. Don't forget the fake moon landing. She changed the subject. How's Dubbo? The same. Stinking unbearable dry heat. And the project's a mess. The CEO keeps changing his mind about what he wants. I keep telling Steve that we need to pin him down or we'll never deliver. But you know what he's like. All talk, no action. Adam made similar complaints about most projects he worked on, always interlaced with criticisms of his boss Stephen West. Amber made sympathetic noises and checked herself in the ensuite mirror. She grimaced at her new look, black hair falling in a short layered bob around her face and just a touch of mascara on her eyelashes. It was a far cry from the flawless look she'd worn to work. Before Oliver arrived, cute, adorable wrecking ball that he was. Adam was still talking. I'm counting down the days until I can get the hell out of here. Me too, she said, clenching her teeth to stop the truth slipping out. It was her mother's help she was missing, not Adam's half-hearted efforts. She glanced at the clock. I've got to go. I promised Beck I'd meet her a couple of hours before so we could get coffee and find a good spot. Give me a call later so I know you're okay. He sounded resigned. Will do. Love you. You too. The street was hazy with smoke blown from several small grass fires that were burning in Western Sydney and some larger bushfires in the Blue Mountains. She pulled the hood of the carrier over Oliver's head and settled a mask over her face, light blue to match her blue tank top. Light grey clouds blocked the worst of the sun's heat, but the air was thick and humid. Sweat dripped down her chest to where Oliver was nestled. Out front, the line of Saturday traffic lurched its way towards the bridge across the Epping train line. The odd driver tooted a horn. Amber outpaced the cars as she strode down the footpath, but took her own turn waiting for the slow change of traffic lights at Carlingford Road, a western artery from Epping to Carlingford. She passed a succession of Asian restaurants hugging the footpath, dodged bus passengers spread across the footpath and glanced out inside the pub, which was dead apart from 2 early morning pokie players. Leaping the station stairs 2 at a time, she took silent pleasure in beating the people who had squashed themselves into the small lift. She was less pleased that she just missed the train. On the escalator, she ran her her hands through her hair. The back, where it touched her neck, was damp with sweat. The platform was dominated by large billboards advertising tutoring services and real estate agencies. Rocking from side to side to keep Oliver relaxed, she inspected the other passengers. None met her gaze. Most of them were staring at their phones with glazed eyes. The train arrived with a screech. It was 40 minutes to the city. Amber tried to relax, but found herself squirming in her seat, almost upsetting Oliver. A year ago, Adrian Walker, a minor minister in the Australian government, had orchestrated a leadership spill and wrested the prime ministership from its previous incumbent. In the following months, he'd brought in a succession of new security and anti-terrorism laws, claiming that they were needed to fight unspecified terrorism threats. The new laws centralised control over the military and federal police in the Prime Minister's office and sidelined up the other ministers and judiciary. The sad thing was that most Australians didn't notice. Amber had been aware of the issue because Beck had attended weeks of protests opposing the new laws and filled her social media feed with links to articles and petitions about them. But Amber had scrolled past, focused on the excitement and discomfort of pregnancy, and then overwhelmed by the constant demands of looking after Oliver. That had changed a week ago when Prime Minister Walker cancelled the Australian election, due to be held at the end of the month. Several members of the government and minor parties and all the opposition had opposed the move. They'd been arrested and they were being held without charge or access to lawyers under one of the new security laws. The Governor-General, who people expected to have an opinion on the matter, had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Amber squirmed again. It was unprecedented. People should be rioting in the streets. But it was a normal Saturday morning in Epping. Were she and Beck the only ones in the world who cared? The train pulled into Wynyard Station. Amber jumped over the gap and wriggled her shoulders to move the carrier into a comfortable position. A smooth wooden balustrade guided the way down into the depths of the station, a reminder of the more optimistic time in Sydney's life when the underground station had been built. A modern metal balustrade had been installed in front of it, no doubt safer, but not as attractive. Amber found most of the station too utilitarian to be beautiful, with its square white pillars, low silver and white ceiling, and grey tiles and electronic ticket gates. But she loved the art installation that hung above the escalators at one of the exits. Created from the old wooden escalator, it twisted and turned above the commuters' heads, the antithesis of the monstrous commute suffered by most of the people who walked under it. A dozen men overtook her on the stairs, some coming up behind her, others ignoring the signs and painted arrows directing them to keep to the left side of the stairs. They wore grey or black bandana-style face masks that covered their necks up to their noses. She wondered how they could stand the thick jackets they were wearing in the heavy humidity. One tripped on the stairs next to her. She gripped his arm to help him regain his balance. "Are you okay?" Her words trailed off as she glimpsed something black and thin poking out of the bottom of his jacket. "Fine, thanks." He tugged the jacket down and fled down the stairs. Amber froze on the step as the men disappeared into the crowd. "Come on." A girl pushed past, her thick blonde hair escaping from under a blue denim cap. Amber followed her down the stairs. She was holding a large piece of cardboard with "I want my democracy sausage" printed in coloured marker above a rough outline of a sausage. Amber smiled at the reference to the fundraising sausages sold at many polling booths on election days. She hesitated at the gate, searching for Beck. The station was busier than usual for a Saturday. "Amber!" Beck barreled through the people, heading away from the gates, a force of nature, all wild chestnut hair and flowing skirts. Her face mask was black with the word freedom printed on it. "You brought the baby." Her intense blue eyes zeroed in on Oliver. "Shit, you cut your hair." She tugged at one of Amber's short strands and gave her a hug. Amber jerked out of her embrace. "I just saw someone with a gun." Beck returned her gaze to Oliver. "I didn't know you were bringing him." "Of course I did. I told you Adam was away." "Yeah, but I thought your mum would be falling over herself for a chance to babysit." She's in China with Dad, visiting my grandparents. Did you hear what I said about the gun? Sorry? A gun? Her eyes swept the station. I can't see him now. It was under his jacket. There were a bunch of them, all wearing jackets. Maybe they're all hiding guns. Maybe it was something else, Beck suggested. You're not familiar with guns, are you? Amber frowned. I might not have fired one, but I know what they look like. Beck was distracted by a man with pasty skin and long curly grey hair flowing out from a red rolled bandana, lugging a painted wooden placard that said, Australia votes 1 for democracy. It's a good sign that some oldies are coming, she said. The man glared at her. They won't if you insult them. Beck dismissed this with a shrug. She ran critical eyes over Amber and froze. First your hair, and now this. What? Amber said, patting her hair. I've been telling you for years that makeup is a tool of the patriarchy used to control women. You finally listened to me. Amber pulled a face. I just don't have time to put it on anymore. Beck beamed. Exactly. Do you know that women who wear makeup spend an average of 9 days a year applying it? Amber rolled her eyes. Where do you get these figures? Beck ignored the question, scanning the stream of people coming out of the station. Half a head shorter than Amber, the difference in their height was accentuated by the weight Beck had put on in the past couple of years. All the nights Beck spent debating politics over gourmet pizza and organic red wine were catching up with her. Amber grimaced, feeling a pang of guilt for the uncharitable thought. She opened her mouth to repeat her concerns about the man with the gun. Beck didn't give her a chance. Let's go, she said, whirling away. Amber hurried after her to the station exit. As soon as she caught up, Beck pulled her into the throng of protesters ambling towards Martin Place on either side of the light rail line, spilling out onto the tracks. Amber wrinkled her nose at the smoke haze, which was much thicker in the city than in Epping. The cloud had cleared, and the sun drifted above the station, a squat, baleful red blob in the sky. A train came up behind the protesters, ringing its bell. The protesters on the track pushed back onto the footpath, forcing Beck to slow down. Amber caught her breath and eyed the crowd. Beck had dragged her to a few rallies over the years. Most of the protesters had been young, and apart from some protests about Aboriginal rights, white. This crowd was different. It was a mix of younger people, families, older people, of a variety of ethnicities. The mood was different too. The protesters looked grim and resolute, prepared for a tough battle. About 2/3 of the crowd wore face masks. It was unclear if they were concerned about the smoke in the air, coronavirus, or the latest conspiracy making the rounds on social media, and the government was arresting dissidents by using real-time facial recognition through CCTV cameras. She saw a group of Asian students wearing the all-black t-shirts, jeans and face masks worn by democracy protesters in Hong Kong. For a few minutes she and Beck were engulfed by a group of Middle Eastern families, children with their hands clutched by women in headscarves or riding on the shoulders of men, teenagers laughing and elbowing each other, their voices loud and noticeable in the grim crowd. Older people fanning themselves in the heat. Beck kept moving and they left the families behind, following 2 middle-aged women in activewear, their hands clutching cardboard signs that read "Walk Away Walker" and "Free What's His Name," the latter with a cut-out picture of the opposition leader. Amber screwed up her face trying to remember what his name was. He had been having trouble getting cut through with the Australian people even before he was arrested. A line of relaxed state police officers watched the protesters entering Martin Place Mall. Beck's eyes were drawn above them to the General Post Office building, awash with pillars and arched windows, a majestic clock tower rising above it. She turned 180 degrees until she faced the GIO building, which had a more utilitarian look, its many levels of plain windows drawing the eye to its limited columns and the tower that capped it. Amber watched a preschool child approach the police officers, trailed by his father. An officer knelt to chat with the child, showing him a portable radio and taser. Beck spoke in her ear to be heard over the noise of the crowd. "Let's find somewhere out of the way since you've got Ollie." Amber pulled her attention back to Beck. "You don't have to do anything." "Nah, I've done my bit, helping set up and get the word out. Beck pushed through the protesters and deeper into Martin Place, stopping every so often to glance at one of the heritage buildings. No matter how many times she came to Martin Place, Beck always enjoyed the architecture. Amber kept her eyes on Beck's back, afraid of losing her in the crowd. A large group of Year 11 and 12 students of various ethnicities perched on and around the cenotaph, a large square block of stone flanked by a bronze soldier and sailor that commemorated defence personnel killed in World War I. In defiance of sensible health precautions, the students passed a cigarette around, each taking a drag. The smoke merged with the cigarette smoke from the bushfires. Beck wove her way to a coffee shop about a third of the way through the mall. She had pushed the door open and they entered, a blast of air conditioning hitting them. There were a few people in a line ahead of them. Amber luxuriated in the cool air, hitting the sweat on her body. Inside, the smell of smoke was muted. A harassed young man in a plain black t-shirt was on his own beside the counter. His name tag read Josh Zadrevik. Josh Zadrevik. He made their coffees and slid a Portuguese tart and a croissant into separate paper bags for them. The heat when they left the shop took Amber's breath away. She looked for a shady spot, but all available shade had a swarm of people huddling under it. "Where to?" Beck shrugged. "Here will do." They took up position next to the door of the shop. More people flooded into the mall. Despite the large crowd, there was little pushing. People were courteous. Amber unhooked her mask from one ear to sip her coffee. She tried to relax but kept thinking about the man with the gun. Amber's words came back to her. Walker seemed willing to do whatever it takes to stay in power. She shivered. "This is fantastic," Beck said. Her eyes sparkled as they followed a group of Aboriginal people carrying the Aboriginal flag. A middle-aged Vietnamese woman squeezing the hand of an older woman followed behind. "This is an even better turnout than we'd hoped for. I overheard that family saying they came down from Katoomba." She nodded at a family standing next to them wearing long pants and sneakers. One child whined about the heat. A group of young people marched past with a green banner that read Young Nationals. Amber suspected this was the first time that Beck's interests had aligned with those of the Conservative National Party. She finished her coffee and checked that Oliver wasn't overheating in the character. His hair was wet with sweat. Concerned he might get dehydrated, she sat down on the ground to breastfeed him, throwing a wrap over her breasts and his head for modesty. There was an uncomfortable tug in her breast as he started to suck, and a hot flush spread across her body, warming her even more. Her mouth went dry. She sipped water from her water bottle. Without detaching, Oliver reached out a hand and tore the wrap off his head. "Well, I tried." Amber screwed the wrap up and shoved it into the pocket of the carrier. She broke a piece off her croissant and shoved it in her mouth, dropping crumbs into Oliver's hair. Beck took snaps of the crowd on her phone and posted them on her social media account. She squatted down next to Amber. "Look what just came up on my feed." Amber took the phone and shaded it with her hand. It was the entry to the Australian Parliament House in Canberra. Two blurry figures stood in the shadow. She squinted at them. They appeared to be a man wearing a lumpy red hat, standing next to a child. What am I looking at? Apparently the small figure is Walker, and the tall one is one of the monsters that are supposed to be working with him. Amber snorted and passed the phone back. "I only believe in human monsters." She switched Oliver to the other breast, finished her croissant, and replaced her mask. Beck bit into her Portuguese tart, frowning at the phone. A woman their age stumbled past with a takeaway coffee and a placard with several penises painted on it. Beck read the placard out loud and grinned. Only politicians with small penises are afraid to face an election. Oliver's mouth slipped off Amber's nipple. His eyes closed and his lips curled up in a drunken smile. The mall filled up. A sea of feet and legs surrounded Amber. She adjusted her clothes, slid Oliver back into the carrier and stood up. Beck stood too and snapped photos of herself within the crowd. People continued to arrive. State police directed recent arrivals away from the mall. They filled the side streets leading into Martin Place and snaked down George Street. A microphone crackled into life. Amber squinted through the crowd. A stage had been set up roughly halfway along the mall. The MC stepped up to the microphone. His curated look, well-cut suit, designer blonde hair falling into his eyes, was marred by the sweat staining his shirt. She strained to hear what he was saying, but couldn't make it out, despite the large speakers dotted around the square. A group of teenage girls to her left didn't seem to mind. They had started cheering before he even spoke. "We love you, Mitch!" shrieked one. Amber nudged Beck. "Is he famous?" "You don't recognise him." "Mitch Keddy. He won one of those singing competition shows last year." "Oh, reality. Right, reality TV." Amber rolled her eyes. Beck shrugged. "Always helps to get celebrity endorsement of the cause." The state premier stepped up to the microphone. Amber caught some of her words, her voice loud and full of passion. "A betrayal of the trust of Australians, Australia's place in the office of the Prime Minister, a betrayal of our Australian values, a betrayal of what it means to be Australian. We stand before you, Prime Minister, all of us representing 26 million Australians, to say that you are no longer worthy of this office." The crowd cheered as she stepped away to be replaced by the state opposition leader, the two speaking in unison for once. Other speakers followed, the leader of the state Nationals and the Greens parties, and the mayor of the city of Sydney. The MC returned and led the crowd in chants. The crowd lost its grim feel and developed a party atmosphere. Amber couldn't help enjoying herself. "Shouted out, 1, 2, 3, Australia is a democracy," she called in unison with the crowd. She trailed off as the people closest to the stage stopped chanting and thrust backwards. They were blocked by the people behind them. Chanting was replaced by shrieks. "What's going on?" Beck clutched Amber's arm and stood on her toes, lifting her chin to see past the people in front of them. Amber strained to see the stage. "I don't know." Loud bangs rang out across the square. People screamed and pushed. "Gunfire!" Beck's voice quivered. Her fingernails bit into Amber's arm. "Ow!" Amber tried to pull her arm free. Beck didn't seem to notice. The crowd was moving like a crazed beast. Amber watched the woman with the small penises placard fall over. Other people were forced over the top of her. She wrapped her free arm around Oliver. Adam had been right. She shouldn't have brought him. Someone wrenched her arm away. "This way." She met the eyes of Josh, the young man who had made their coffees. He tugged her towards the shop. Beck hung onto her other arm so that they wouldn't be separated. People nearby followed, jostling one another until there was a mob in the small shop. Beck, Amber and Josh were crushed against a display cabinet filled with cupcakes with smiling animal faces. Amber blinked at a panda cupcake, disconcerted by its beaming face. "Thank you," she said to Josh. He was staring out of the shop window, his eyebrows pulled in tight towards his eyes, and didn't seem to hear. "Oh, fuck," Beck breathed. "There really are monsters." She had pulled herself up onto the bench to see past the people between them and the shop window. Amber followed her gaze. The woman with the small penises placard laid unmoving on the ground. 3 people ran past, including a child. Shots rang out and they fell to the ground. Amber clamped her hand over her mouth and turned to see who had shot them. Despite Beck's words, she expected to see people, but the 3 figures firing automatic weapons into the remains of the crowd, though humanoid, weren't people. Over 3 meters tall, they towered over the panicked humans. They wore identical black combat pants, jackets, gloves and boots, but no body armour or protective vests, and no helmets. A hysterical laugh bubbled up in Amber's chest as she looked at their heads. They had no need for helmets. Their foreheads were covered by a deep mahogany bony plate that swept back from their nose and ended in a half circle over the back of their heads. The bone tapered to 6 horns evenly spaced around the half circle. The horns were sharpened to lethal points, but set so far back on their heads that she thought they could only be decorative, not weapons. They each wore a very long, thin sword scabbard made from black leather. A long sword hilt protruded from each scabbard, wrapped in matching black leather. It struck her as incongruous that they were equipped with automatic weapons and swords. She swallowed the hysterical laugh before it burst out and swung around. Josh's eyes bulged at the monster. She had to swallow a couple of times before she could speak. "Do you have a back exit?" Yeah, follow me." Their words broke through the protesters' shock. The ones within earshot started moving, and those further behind scrambled after them. Amber stuck by Josh's side, shielding Oliver with her arms. Her eyes sought Beck. Beck stayed on the bench, eyes glued to the action outside the window. She ignored the people jostling her legs to follow Josh. Amber pushed her way back through the frenzied protesters and grabbed Beck's arm, glancing back out the window. "That's the man I saw," her voice squeaked. The men who had overtaken her on the stairs at Wynyard Station slipped through the last of the fleeing protesters, keeping low and sliding between the buildings until they had surrounded the monsters. They discarded their bulky jackets. Each of them held a sleek black rifle. At some invisible signal, they fired at the monsters. A rain of bullets hit the monsters, stopped short, and tumbled to the ground at the monsters' feet. The kinetic energy drained out of them. The monsters turned to the opposite sides, their backs together, and fired. 2 of the men fell. They fired again, and another 2 fell. The remaining men became frantic. A volley of bullets hit the monster, but every bullet fell to the ground. The monsters continued to pick the men off. The last 2 men tried to flee. They were hit from behind. An unnatural silence enveloped them all. "Bullets don't kill them," Beck said. "Let's get out of here." Amber tugged her off the bench. "Before they kill us." One of the monsters turned towards the shop. The skin of its face was wrinkled and grey, elephant skin. Its eyes were completely black, as though it had no iris or sclera, just a giant pupil. Somehow this was more menacing than the conspicuous bony plate and horns. Amber shuddered. Beck looked around, blinking, and seemed to realise for the first time that they were alone in the shop. She allowed Amber to drag her out the back. The last of the protesters were retreating through a second door into an alley. Amber and Beck followed. Amber looked for Josh, but he disappeared. The remaining protesters fled, avoiding eye contact with each other. If you would like to support this channel, come across to the Black Cockie Press website, www.blackcockiepress.com.au, where you will find books and other writing services to help with your writing.